Whence come and whither go? Where do we come from? Where are we going? This is one of the oldest human questions. It can be asked in prayer, in science, in philosophy, in grief, in wonder, at the birth of a child, in the ruins of war, or at the edge of ecological breakdown. But today, the question returns with new urgency. It is no longer only a question about the soul, or destiny, or the meaning of existence. It is a question about life itself, becoming conscious of what it is conserving. We do not ask this question from outside life. We ask as living beings, we ask as bodies, we ask as children of earth, we ask as beings who breathe air we did not create, drink water we did not invent, eat from soils and microbial worlds we barely understand, and live within ecological histories that long precede us. So the first answer is simple. We come from life, but this must not be reduced. We do not come from life as an abstraction, a commodity, a resource, or a variable in a model. We come from life as living organization, from bodies that continuously produce and conserve themselves in relation with the conditions that make living possible. In Humberto Maturana's biology, living beings are molecular autopoietic systems. They are networks of molecular production that continuously bring themselves forth as distinct unities. A living being has a boundary. It is not the same as its surroundings, and yet no living being exists alone. The organism is distinct from its niche, but not separate from it. The niche is not part of the organism's molecular self-production, but without the niche, living cannot continue. So life is not isolated self-making. Life is conserved, organization in organism niche, coherence. We come from this coherence. We come from breathing before speaking. We come from metabolism before meaning. We come from cellular self-production before consciousness. We come from earth before economy. We come from niche before nation. We come from a field of living relations before the self can say I. This does not diminish the human being. It restores the human being to the living ground. Civilization is not outside life. Civilization is inside life. And this matters because when a civilization forgets that it is inside life, it begins to treat the life ground as background, resource, or sacrifice. It begins to imagine that economy, power, technology, law, and security can stand above the living conditions that make them possible. But they cannot. Life comes first. Everything else rests upon it. The second answer is that we come from structural coupling. A living being does not adapt to a fixed environment like an object being shaped from the outside. The organism and its medium change together through a history of recurrent interaction. The world does not simply instruct the organism. The organism does not simply impose itself on the world. Living is a history of congruent change between organism and niche. This is structural coupling. It means that what is conserved in evolution is not only a body, a gene, or a trait. What is conserved is a manner of living. A lineage continues as long as a way of living remains viable. This is the bridge from biology to civilization, because a civilization is also a conserved drift. If children grow in fear, fear becomes part of the drift. If economies conserve debt, precarity, and extraction, they become part of the drift. If institutions conserve distrust, distrust becomes part of the drift. If technologies conserve attention capture becomes part of the drift. If religions conserve exclusion becomes part of the drift. If politics conserves humiliation and revenge become part of the drift. We become what our manner of living conserves. This is not determinism, it is responsibility. The third answer is that we come from bodyhood becoming humanness in relational space. Human beings are biological bodies, but our humanness is not reducible to physiology. We become human in relation, in emotioning, languaging, conversation, reflection, care, play, imitation, recognition, and coexistence. We are not minds trapped in bodies. We are not machines with culture added later. We are cultural biological beings. The biological and the cultural can be distinguished, but they cannot be separated in actual living. Touch alters development. Fear alters perception. Shame alters posture. Love alters regulation. Culture alters desire. Language alters memory. Institutions enter the body through food, sleep, stress, recognition, humiliation, work, care, and safety. So medicine cannot be only organ repair. Education cannot be only information transfer. Politics cannot be only institutional design. Economics cannot be only allocation. Spirituality cannot be only belief. Each domain enters human bodyhood because humanness is lived through the recursive interplay between body and relational world. To wound the relational world is to wound bodies. To repair the relational world is to repair the conditions in which bodies can live humanly. The fourth answer is that we come from love, play, and languaging. Maturana's answer to the origin of humanness is striking, not domination, not conquest, not abstraction, not calculation, not tool use alone, not competition alone, not aggression. Humanness arises in the conservation of a manner of living, centered in love, intimacy, play, tenderness, food sharing, mutual presence, and languaging. The child does not become a self in isolation. The child becomes a self in relation. Through touch, play, rhythm, tenderness, and shared worlds, the child begins to distinguish self, other, body, world, and possibility. Selfhood is not the opposite of relation. Selfhood is a relational achievement. Language, too, is not first an instrument for transmitting information. It is a way of living together. It arises in coordination, in shared doings, gestures, emotions, rhythms, and mutual orientation. We come from love becoming language, and language becoming a conserved manner of living. This reverses much of the modern hierarchy. Modernity often treats reason as mature when it is detached from emotion, body, relation, and love. But reason detached from love is not mature humanness. It is a distortion of humanness. For Maturana, love is not sentimentality. It is the relational domain in which the other appears as a legitimate other in coexistence with oneself. Love does not mean agreement with everything. Love does not erase boundaries. Love does not remove discernment. Love is the condition in which distinction does not become negation. Without love, language can become manipulation. Without love, reason can become domination. Without love, diagnosis can become reduction. Without love, security can become threat. Without love, religion can become exclusion. Without love, civilization can become organized disintegration. So love is not only the origin of humanness. Love is the condition for the recovery of humanness. The fifth answer is that we come from culture. Each of us is born from a biological womb into a cultural womb. Before we can reflect, culture has already shaped what feels real, valuable, sacred, shameful, successful, dangerous, possible, forbidden, normal, and desirable. Culture lives in stories, gestures, institutions, rituals, expectations, silences, permissions, prohibitions, and repeated distinctions. Some distinctions bless life, others wound before they are understood. A child may learn, I am loved before I am useful, or the child may learn, I must perform to be loved. I must obey to belong. I must hide my knowing. I must silence my body. I must confuse fear with respect. I must confuse achievement with worth. I must confuse silence with peace. Such distinctions become worlds. They become posture, stress, relationship, institution, and destiny. This is why much human suffering is culturally generated. A person may live an undeserved devaluation as if it were deserved, because at some point in childhood, cultural invalidation became conserved as legitimate. Liberation begins when reflection allows the person to recover self-respect and self-love. Culture is therefore both womb and trap. It can conserve trust, tenderness, curiosity, play, dignity, self-respect, reflection, and mutual legitimacy, or it can conserve domination, shame, fear, rivalry, arrogance, mistrust, competition, and submission. We come from conserved conversations, some that bless life, and some that wound it. And this brings us to the turning point. Reflection. If culture is the second womb, reflection is the moment the womb becomes visible. A culture without reflection repeats itself unconsciously. A culture with reflection can ask, what distinction are we conserving? What world does this distinction bring forth? Do we want to continue conserving it? Reflection is not merely thinking. It is a living interruption. It is a pause in the flow of inherited living where another possibility appears. A person can interrupt self-devaluation. A family can interrupt inherited shame. A religion can interrupt sacred violence. A state can interrupt fear-based security. An economy can interrupt claimed sovereignty. A civilization can interrupt misrelevance, but only if it can see the distinction it has been living. Reflection is the hinge between where we come from and where we are going. We come from conserved distinctions. We go toward reflected or unreflected conservation. If what we conserve remains unconscious, the future is drift. If what we conserve becomes visible, the future becomes choice. But reflection alone is not enough. Reflection needs discipline. Maturana teaches us that every distinction brings forth a domain of validity. A distinction may reveal something in one domain while obscuring something in another. The danger begins when one domain is mistaken for the whole. We reduce love to chemistry. We reduce health to lab values. We reduce education to scores. We reduce economy to money. We reduce security to force. We reduce spirituality to belief. We reduce peace to the absence of shooting. We reduce nature to resource. Each reduction begins when a useful distinction becomes too hard, too total, too sovereign. Life-coherent reflection asks, what domain am I in? What does this distinction reveal? What does it obscure? What happens if I treat this partial distinction as total? The task is not vague holism. The task is careful distinction without false separation. Distinguish domains without severing them. Integrate domains without reducing them. This is one of the great disciplines of wisdom. Because without this discipline, civilization becomes trapped by its own abstractions. And that brings us to the second half of the question. Whither go? Where are we going? The answer is, we go toward what we conserve. The future is not merely ahead of us. The future is being generated now by what we conserve. A lineage continues as long as a manner of living is conserved. A culture continues as long as a network of conversations is conserved. A wound continues as long as the distinctions that generate it are conserved. A civilization continues along the path of what its institutions, metrics, technologies, economies, securities, emotions, and sacred commitments conserve. So the question is not only, what do we hope for? Many societies hope for peace while conserving humiliation, arms races, revenge, and militarized identity. Many economies claim to value well-being while conserving debt dependency, rent extraction, ecological depletion, and money value supremacy. Many religions preach love while conserving sacred exclusion. Many institutions declare service while conserving self-protection. Many technologies promise connection while conserving attention capture. Hope does not determine the future. Conservation does. If we conserve fear, we go toward fear. If we conserve domination, we go toward domination. If we conserve money value over life value, we go toward the Midas trap. If we conserve security through another's insecurity, we go toward the Thucydides trap. If we conserve sacred insecurity, we go toward violence. If we conserve misrelevance, we go toward intelligent collapse. If we conserve love, reflection, self-respect, life value, ecological coherence, structural peace and repair, we go toward life-coherent civilization. This is neither fatalism nor optimism. It is responsibility. The traps of civilization can now be seen as conserved drifts. A trap is not merely a mistake. It is a conserved distinction that has become blind to the life it was meant to protect. The Thucydides trap conserves fear as security. It arises when states seek safety through the insecurity of others. Each side interprets the other through threat. Recognition becomes weakness. Restraint becomes danger. Dialogue becomes manipulation. The other's safety becomes one's own insecurity. Fear becomes destiny. The corrective is not naive trust. It is life-coherent security that protects the living societies, ecosystems, futures, and planetary conditions that power is supposed to serve. The Midas trap conserves claimed sovereignty over the life ground. Money, credit, debt, property, and finance were created as instruments of coordination. But when financial claims become more protected than the living conditions from which all value arises, civilization enters the Midas trap. Housing must satisfy investors before shelter. Health must satisfy billing systems before healing. Education must satisfy credential markets before wisdom. Land must satisfy asset value before ecological belonging. Work must satisfy debt service before human dignity. The corrective is not anti-money. It is the restoration of money, credit, property, law, technology, and governance to life service. Sacred insecurity conserves wounded ultimacy as violence. Human beings cannot live without ultimate concerns. We protect what we believe matters most: God, land, people, nation, memory, freedom, justice, survival, dignity, children, ancestors, future. But danger begins when sacred concern fuses with fear, trauma, purity, revenge, sovereignty, or institutional self-preservation. Then compromise appears as betrayal. The other appears as existential threat. Violence appears defensive. Civilian suffering becomes tragic necessity. Memory becomes weapon. Religion becomes cultural violence. Justice becomes revenge. Grief becomes permission to destroy. The corrective is not the abolition of sacred concern. It is discernment. Does what we defend as ultimate actually protect life? Or does it require life to become disposable? Misrelevance conserves the wrong things as mattering most. This may be the most general trap of all. A society may have intelligence, information, technology, policy, money, institutions, and expertise, yet still organize itself around the wrong signals. The measurable becomes more important than the meaningful. The urgent becomes more important than the vital. The profitable becomes more important than the life-serving. The optimized becomes more important than the wise. A clinic can measure throughput while missing healing. A school can measure performance while missing formation. A state can measure growth while missing depletion. An algorithm can optimize engagement while degrading attention. An institution can protect procedure while abandoning purpose. The corrective is life-coherence wisdom, learning to let what truly matters matter again. These traps are not separate. They share one deeper pattern. A necessary distinction becomes dangerous when it is conserved beyond the living relations that gave it meaning. Security becomes fear. Money becomes claim. Religion becomes exclusion. Knowledge becomes misrelevance. Institution becomes self-preservation. Civilization becomes organized disintegration. The task is not only to escape the trap. The task is to stop conserving the distinction that generates it. This is the great corrective. The great corrective is not a doctrine. It is a change in what human beings consciously conserve. It begins when a culture can say, "We no longer wish to conserve fear as security. We no longer wish to conserve money as master value. We no longer wish to conserve sacred stories that require disposable life. We no longer wish to conserve institutions that protect themselves over their purpose. We no longer wish to conserve knowledge that does not repair harm. We no longer wish to conserve distinctions that sever us from the life ground." This is not the rejection of boundaries, law, science, money, governance, security, ritual, institutions, or technology. It is their return to life service. Fear-based security must become relational security. Money value must become life value. Domination must become legitimate coexistence. Sacred insecurity must become discernment. Misrelevance must become wisdom. Extraction must become repair. Control must become participation. Civilization over nature must become civilization within the life ground. The life-coherent criterion is simple. Does this distinction, institution, policy, technology, metric, sacred story, or economic arrangement preserve, repair, or expand life capacity? If not, it must be revised, restrained, de-implemented, or transformed. A life-coherent distinction reveals without reducing. It protects without negating. It binds without imprisoning. It measures without forgetting what cannot be measured. It secures without imposing permanent insecurity on others. It remembers wounds without sanctifying revenge. It organizes human power in service of the life ground. This is not the end of history. It is not a perfect civilization. It is not a world without conflict, ambiguity, error, or suffering. It is a new manner of drift. A drift in which human beings learn to ask again and again, what are we conserving? What world does this conservation bring forth? Does this world protect life? Does it restore self-respect? Does it allow the other to appear as legitimate in coexistence? Does it preserve the living conditions through which future generations may live? This is the work of humanness becoming conscious of itself. So we return to the beginning. Whence come and whither go? We come from life. We come from molecular self-production, organism niche, coherence, structural coupling, bodyhood, tenderness, play, language, culture, and reflection. We come from earth becoming human through a conserved manner of living. We come from love becoming language. We come from conversations that brought forth worlds before we knew we were bringing them forth. And where are we going? We are going toward what we conserve. If we conserve fear, domination, abstraction, extraction, sacred insecurity, and miss relevance, then that is where we go. But if we conserve love, reflection, self-respect, life value, structural peace, ecological repair, and wisdom, then another future becomes possible. There is no guarantee from outside our living, no godlike rescue from beyond our choices, no technical solution that can save a civilization from the distinctions it continues to conserve. The human question is therefore immediate. How do we want to live together? Because how we live together, is where we are going. We come from living relation. We go toward conserved relation. The future of humanness depends on whether the relations we conserve remain answerable to life.